I have to be when Herb led his prayer earlier today, he mentioned something that I have heard prayed for years, especially as it pertains to preachers, to ministers. He prayed that I would have a ready recollection of the things that I had prepared. For the longest time growing up, I didn't know what that meant. The older I get, the more I appreciate that prayer. While I too hope I have a ready recollection of the things I prepared, what I failed to readily recollect was my iPad and left it under my bed this morning. So we're really going to pray for a ready recollection of what I had prepared. No, I actually have a copy, but it's back on paper, so it's going to require a little bit. If you got your Bibles, we're going to go to John chapter 8 this morning. John chapter 8 is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's one of my favorite accounts of Christ in the Bible. I'm not going to take a lot of time. I'm not going to take any time, as a matter of fact, talking about the fact that your John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11 may be bracketed. There may be footnotes at the bottom as to its authenticity. But I will say this, I fully 100% believe this account of Jesus Christ happened, that he encountered this woman, that this happened in the temple. If you got questions about it, come talk to me. There's all kinds of theological evidence to the authenticity of this passage. Just understand that as we get into it. But before we start, let me just ask you something, and I really want the attention of these first couple of rows. Have you ever done anything wrong and gotten away with it? I see one really good head nod going up here. Carrie, you need to be watching this one. Anybody ever done anything wrong and gotten away with it? I mean, you didn't have to suffer the Josh, I could have figured. I saw that. Thanks for your honesty, brother. I'm with you. Some of you I know, but there's no consequences, there's no ramifications. You just did it and you got away with it, right? And sometimes you walk away from those encounters and you breathe. It's kind of like when you're driving down I-10, right? And you're driving, maybe you're going to Buc-ee's for coffee. I don't know. Some people do that. You're going down and you're going maybe a little excessive in your speed. And you top a hill, and there's that friendly little car there with the lights on top of it. And you go flying by, and they don't move. And you think, what? Whew. Got away with that one, right? This morning in John chapter 8, we're going to talk about a man who got away with it. All right? We're going to talk about a guy who gets away with something. As a matter of fact, what he gets away with, had he been caught, had he been prosecuted for what he had done wrong, he would have been executed. It was a capital offense, but he got away with it, okay? In John chapter 8, we're going to see where a man and a woman get caught in the very act of adultery. I know in your Bibles the heading probably says a woman caught in adultery. Let me just, for those of you who don't know, adultery can't take place with just one, okay? There were two. And although it may say that it's about the woman who got caught in adultery, we're going to talk about the guy who didn't get caught a little bit, okay? And you need to understand that according to the law of Moses, if you got caught for this, the penalty was death. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 22, it says, if a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die. The man who lay with the woman and the woman, so you shall purge the evil from Israel. Now, before you think that is extreme, that adultery is a capital crime punishable by death, you need to understand the seriousness of this sin as God sees it. Okay? It violates marriage created and instituted by God between a man and a woman. It destroys a society when it spreads and becomes commonplace. It attacks everything that God holds dear. So you need to understand why God is serious about it. But because it is so serious, and because the penalty for it under the law was death, the law also was very, very careful to make sure that before that execution was ever carried out, that the proof for the crime was intact. There was no doubt. This is not hearsay evidence. As a matter of fact, the law for evidence in Deuteronomy 19 says this: a single witness shall not suffice against a person for a crime or any wrong, or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. So you get that, just setting the context here, you understand. Adultery carried with it under the law the penalty of death. But in order for that penalty to be executed, it must have been verifiable by 2 or 3 witnesses, okay? And I don't mean 2 or 3 witnesses seeing somebody walking into a room. I don't mean 2 or 3 witnesses seeing somebody sitting on a couch together. I mean 2 or 3 witnesses that had visual confirmation of the act taking place. They had to see what was going on in order for anybody to be put to death. It's that serious. And understand, we would want nothing less, correct? I mean, if it's a capital offense, you're going to take somebody's life for it, you better have proof. You better have real, verifiable proof. And in that regard, the law was very compassionate in that way because it made sure there was proof before any action could be taken place. Now, with that context said, let's go to John chapter 8. We'll start in verse 1. Ty? Oh, never mind. It's not up there. I thought I was going to have you flip it, but I don't. Starting in verse 1, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. And all the people came to him, and he sat down and he taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery." Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say? This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and he said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more." Awesome, awesome story we have right here. Our story begins right where Jack left off last week, and Jack did a wonderful job of getting us to that point. Thank you, sir. Jesus has just finished the feast. He's just described himself as living water. The Feast of Booths has ended. The people are wondering who Jesus is, what he's all about, especially the religious leaders. Even the Pharisees are divided over who Jesus is and what he's about. They don't know who he is. They can't make up their mind about it. So at the end of that day of the Feast of Booths, he goes up to the Mount of Olives. And that's going to be one of his favorite places, especially during the week leading up to his crucifixion. He's going to spend a lot of time out there by himself on the Mount of Olives. But then early the next morning, very next day, he's back in the temple. And I really want you to get your head wrapped around the context of what's going on here. Okay? He goes back to the temple. He goes into the temple courtyards, and he sits down, and immediately he begins drawing a crowd. And people are coming around to him, and they're listening to him teach, and they're hearing what he's saying. Okay, and in our context, imagine it like this. Jesus is sitting down here on the steps, and there's all of these people around here in church, and they're all listening. He's teaching them, and they're listening. And then all of a sudden, in the middle, there's chaos out there in the foyer, and these guys come walking in, and they're dragging this girl who's probably wrapped up in whatever she could grab, running out of her house, maybe a bed sheet, right? And they drag her right through the middle of the crowd, to the gasps of everybody there, and they throw her, push her down, maybe right in front of Jesus. You got that in your head? And then they want to ask him a legal question. Teacher, this woman's been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say? Here's what I find interesting. Did Jesus know the law? Yeah, he wrote it. He knew exactly what he said. He knew exactly what was in Deuteronomy 22 because he wrote Deuteronomy 22. Do we know what's in the law? Yeah, we just read it. Did the Pharisees know what was in the law? Yeah, they wouldn't have asked the question had they not known the answer. Everybody knew the answer to the question that was asked. Okay? So then the bigger question is, then why ask the question at all? If everybody knows the answer, then what are they doing? Why are they asking him this question? Well, these guys think they're pretty smart. Okay? They think that most of them maybe are lawyers, at least they're experts in the law, and they think they have him trapped. They've thought back and they thought, okay, how can we get rid of this guy? How can we get him out of here? He's teaching in the temple. People are listening to him. You heard what he said yesterday at the Feast of Booths. He calls himself living water. People are wanting to know about him. We got to get rid of him. How are we going to do it? And then their great minds got to wondering, okay, we can come up with a question that'll take care of him once and for all. If we ask him this question about adultery, right? And he says, don't stone her. How many of you would go for that? Let's not stone her? We'd all agree. Don't stone her, right? Okay, well, you all be heathens then, okay? Because the law, what did the law say? If she's guilty and there's evidence, stone her. That's what the law says. Now, they said, if Jesus says don't stone her, then we'll portray him as soft. And we'll portray him as being unfaithful to the law. And then no one in the temple will listen to him. And rightfully so. But on the other hand, if he says, stone her, then we can report him to Rome. We can say he's a revolutionary because he's contradicting Roman law, because Roman law prohibited anybody from executing anyone else except for the Romans. See, in their minds, there's only two answers, and we've got him. Either he says, don't stone her, and we've got him there, or he says stoner, and we've got him there. And they kind of sit back with their arms crossed, I know, going, okay, what are you going to say? What are you going to say? And I absolutely love Jesus' response, which is nothing. Nothing. He bends down. He starts drawing in the dirt that's accumulated on the floor of the temple. I don't know what he's drawing. Nobody knows what he's writing. We don't know. But he's there. And man, free lesson right here in the middle, okay? There's so much wisdom in this. Because sometimes the best answer is nothing. Sometimes the very best thing you can say is nothing at all. Proverbs, Solomon gives us this wisdom in Proverbs 26, 4 and 5. He says this, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Sometimes it's best not to answer the fool. But then he goes on to say, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Sometimes it is wise, but in this case, in this politically charged atmosphere, in this emotionally charged atmosphere, the crowd's got to be wondering what in the world's going on. The religious leaders are all fired up because they think they've got him. This woman is here. We don't know how she is, but she's caught in the very act of adultery. It's a politically charged, emotionally charged moment, and Jesus takes a little time to just sit back and say nothing. How many of you wish you had that ability? You know, there was a comedian one time, I can't remember his name, but I do remember he talked about being arrested, and the policeman said, you have the right to remain silent. And to which he replied, I know I've got the right, but I just don't have the ability. That's our problem sometimes, isn't it? Sometimes we should remain silent when we just don't have the ability. It all comes flooding out of our mouth. And here Jesus says, you know what? If the Son of God needs to spend some time to stop before he speaks, maybe shouldn't we too? Right? But anyway, that was free. Okay. But so we see him there, he's here, and he's on the ground. And then finally, after what seems like this uncomfortable silence, they keep pressing him. What are you going to say? 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 Finally, he stands up, and he utters these words. He says this, okay, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And I guarantee you, if he had a microphone in his hand at that point, he would have dropped it. That is a mic drop statement. It is, okay, you want to sin? If you ain't got no sin, chunk of rock. And it blew their little Pharisaical minds. Because in their minds, there was only two possible answers, stoner or not. And they had no way of knowing he would come with this. And basically what Jesus does is best the best of them. And he takes what was this unanswerable question and he turns it completely around on them. And then he goes back to writing in the floor. You know, I wish we knew what Jesus was writing on the floor in that dust. You know, none of the Gospels ever record of Jesus ever writing anything except in this story. It's the only time it's ever said that Jesus wrote or was writing. Wish I knew what he was writing. And I tell you what, theologians have speculated for years and years and years and years and years about what Jesus was writing in the floor. Okay? Some think that he was writing the names of the sins of the Pharisees that were standing in front of them. And they look down and they start thinking, oh. Some think that he was writing the name of the man who should have been there with the woman, as we read in the law. Some believe he was writing the name of, or he was writing Jeremiah 17. A lot of people believe this one. Jeremiah 17 says this, O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth. For they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. They think he was writing that. Some have even said that he wrote the word tekel, which is Persian. That may ring a bell for you. It's the story in Daniel chapter 5. You remember the handwriting on the wall? The finger of God comes and he writes a couple of words in Persian. One of them is tekel, and tekel literally means you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. They would have been familiar with that. What did he write? Honestly, we don't have any idea. But what we do know is that his response to them completely diffused the situation, and the accusers began to back off and retreat, with the oldest ones leaving first. The oldest ones probably recognizing the wisdom of Jesus' answer, and they knew they had been bested. He had taken an unanswerable question, and he had turned it into an impossible command. So Jesus looks up, and all that's left around him were the people still watching all that's going on, and this woman. And so he stands up and he says, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? You know, it's at this point we realize just how little we actually know about this lady. She's often been idealized as a good-hearted victim of this terrible injustice, but we really don't know anything about her other than her sin. We don't know if she was gentle. We don't know if she was likable. We don't know if she was harsh. We don't know if she was obnoxious. We don't know if she was sitting on the floor sobbing the tears of someone caught in this shameful act in front of all of these people. We don't know if she was standing there patting her foot with her arms crossed, just glaring at the guys who brought her in. We don't know. We don't know her demeanor at all. Okay? What I do know is that in this counter, Jesus gives this woman 4 things. He gives her 4 things we would do well to remember when we encounter people that we believe are guilty of sin. We believe people have committed the sin, whatever that sin is, whatever you define the sin to be. Okay? And the first thing Jesus gives her is dignity. He gives her dignity. To these scribes and these Pharisees, this woman represented nothing but an opportunity. She was a problem. She was an object, nothing more. But when Jesus faced down her accusers, he turned to her and spoke to her. Up until this point, no one has spoken a word to this woman. They've all talked about her, but no one's talked to her. Now the Son of God turns around and he addresses her and he talks to her. Now think about this for a minute. The Son of God, the Messiah, the living water, the Alpha, the Omega, talks to this woman, and that might have been the most precious gift this woman has ever received. He didn't view her as a failure. He didn't view her as a difficulty. What he saw was a person. He saw a person created in the image of God who, despite her sin, she was in possession of worth from God himself, created in the very image of God himself. And speaking to people is so typical of Jesus as it's recorded in the Gospels. And it's still typical of Jesus today. He values each of us so highly, even despite our sin. He loves us so deeply. And in a world where we often feel worthless, and we are told we're worthless, and we're defined by our past, and we're defined by our failures, and we're defined by our lack, Jesus comes around and says, you know what? You're not defined by any of that. You're defined by the image of God that's within you, and you have worth, and I see that, and I will give you dignity because of that. And if you're here today and you're struggling with sin, I get it. I know we all are, but you need to understand God still sees you in a dignified, worthy way. Because if he didn't, he wouldn't have died for you. He wouldn't have. But the next thing he gives her is compassion. Jesus was compassionate. I know we've talked about what Jesus might have been writing on the floor, but have you ever wondered about why he wrote it? Why did he bend down? Why did he start drawing in the dirt? With the exception of a miracle where he got mud and spit on it and put the mud in the guy's eyes. I mean, we don't really hear him talk about getting down in the dirt and doing a whole bunch of stuff, right? But here he gets down, he gets down on the ground and he starts messing with the dirt, doesn't he, Jack? What's that?
I thought you were going to get down again.
No, I'm not. Where are all your eyes right now? It's on me. If the woman was up there, what would you be looking at? Right now, you'd be looking at me. You would, because you'd be wondering, what are you doing? What's he doing? What's he going to do to Jack? I have scissors in here. I'll tell you what. No. It's an act of compassion. I firmly believe the reason Jesus got down on the ground was to take everyone's eyes off of this woman. Because up until this point, what's everybody looking at? Her. She was a complete object. Jesus, by getting down on the ground and focusing everyone's attention on her, was an act of compassion that says, you know what? Look at me for a while. And wonder. And I know they were all wondering, what's he writing? Who's that about? What did he draw? Right? And then he offers this masterful words. He tells her, neither do I condemn you. Now, we've got to talk about this for just a second, okay? Because many people have taken this as, well, Jesus is soft on sin. Jesus doesn't care about sin. Jesus has forgiven sin. He doesn't know anything about it. That's not what's happening. Neither do I condemn you is not a spiritual declaration. It's a legal one, okay? These Pharisees have come and they have said, because of what you have done, you are guilty of adultery. Therefore, we condemn you to death. That's what the law said. Jesus comes along and says, neither do I condemn you to death, is what he's saying. Make no mistake about it here. Jesus is not saying, I forgive all your sins. He's not making that blanket statement. What he's telling her is, I don't condemn you to death for the sin you have committed, which is still truly, truly compassionate. Because consider this, who was the only person there who was worthy to pick up a rock and throw a stone? He was. Who was the only one there who was sinless? He was. Who was the only one there who righteously understood the law? He was. In every situation, Jesus was the perfect candidate to execute the justice of the law. And yet Jesus says what? I will not condemn you. Also understanding that the one who wrote the law is the only one who has the ability to disregard the consequences of the law, which is Jesus himself. Okay? So he gives her this act of compassion. But thirdly, to go along with it, he gives her honesty. As I said, some want to make this story a sentimental, kind of easy on sin narrative. But in order to do that, you have to ignore Jesus' statement when he says, from now on, what? Sin no more. It's not like you didn't do anything wrong. We're just going to sweep it under the rug. No, her sin had to be addressed, and it had to be addressed honestly. But understand, before he ever talked about her sin, he gave her dignity and he gave her compassion. Man, that's a lesson we can learn. Before you ever engage anybody with their sin, with the problems in their life, with the problems you witness in their life, as you should, as a brother or sister in Christ, because you care for them, you better approach them in dignity and you better approach them in compassion. Way too many people go straight for, I'm just going to be honest with you about it, you're sinning. Well, let's take an example from Jesus and let's talk about dignity and compassion before we talk about sin. Because the response will be drastically different. Okay? And he's honest with her about her sin. But today we have many ways we try to avoid it. We ignore it. We say, I don't want to talk about that. Or we deny it. Well, I didn't do anything wrong. We justify it. Well, it's not my fault. It's my parents' fault, or my job's fault, or my upbringing's fault, or my friend's fault, or my culture's fault. It's somebody's fault, but it's certainly not my fault. Right? But Jesus honestly insisted this woman face her sin. He called sin, sin. And that's so hard to do in our world today because every time a new sin pops up, it gets redefined as something other than sin. But let me tell you something, church. There is only one person who has the authority to define sin, and it's God himself. And God has defined sin in his word. And we have no authority whatsoever to redefine what God has already defined. Kids, I will tell you that despite what you were told, despite what you were taught, it's not alternative lifestyle, it's not anything, it's sin. If God defines it as sin, it's sin, period. There's nothing else there. No other place to go. But you got to make a choice. Am I going to believe God or am I going to follow the world? Because the world will end up redefining everything about your life to make you feel okay. And Jesus doesn't do that. He takes this woman who was caught in the very act of adultery, and he said, yes, what you were doing is sin. It was not a lapse in judgment. It was not just hormones. It was not just, he's sowing his wild oats. No, it's sin. And it's an affront to God. And it's got to be dealt with. So he deals with her honestly, not harshly, but honestly. Because here's the thing. I know there's a typo in here. Oh, there's not. I fixed it. Good. Until we appreciate how bad the bad news of our sin is, we cannot appreciate how good the good news of the gospel is. And if Satan has a deception in the world today, it's this. It's to convince you, it's to convince me that your sin's not that bad. Or that everybody else is doing it. Or that everybody else in the world accepts it. And if he can convince you of that it's not that bad, then guess what? If it's not that bad, then the gospel's not that good. You wonder why people are flocking away from Christianity. Because they've been made to believe that, sin's just not that bad. But it is. Because it's got eternal consequences. So Jesus deals honestly with her. But lastly, he gives her grace and he gives her hope. As I said, nothing indicates in this passage that Jesus forgave this woman of her sin. Yeah, he refused to condemn her of death, but nothing's mentioned of spiritual forgiveness. It kind of reminds me of the words that he spoke to the man who was healed by the pool of Bethesda. You remember that back in John chapter 5? He heals the guy on the Sabbath, and the guy goes into the temple, and the Pharisees want to know who healed you and all this stuff, and he gets thrown out of the temple because of it, and then later on Jesus meets up with him, and Jesus says this, see, you're well, great, sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. Yeah, your physical healing was one thing. Your spiritual healing is still dependent upon your repentance. Still dependent upon you. In the same way, this woman, we don't know how she responds to Jesus' compassion. We don't know how she responds to his honesty. I believe in her heart when he says, sin no more, she doesn't. And she repents and she comes to an understanding of Jesus. But we can't say that she did, okay? But I'd like to believe she did. But still, regardless of that, he offers her grace, he offers her hope. Matter of fact, he uses this phrase, from now on. It literally means from the now. And it's totally forward looking. When someone we know, maybe you yourself, you've been identified with a particular sin. The tendency is for us to look backwards to that time and identify ourselves as that person. And let me just tell you something, church. Jesus doesn't identify you that way. Jesus doesn't identify you by your past sin. And we shouldn't identify each other by our past sin. Because you know why? We all have past sin. Anybody in here not? No, we do. We all have past sin. But the beauty of this statement is from now on. How many of you have ever seen The Greatest Showman? I love that movie. Nora loves that movie, don't you, sweetie? I think we've watched it like 7 times in the last 3 days. Yeah, we love that movie. But there's a song in it. And he comes to the conclusion, you know what I've been doing in the past hasn't worked. I forgot who I was living for. I forgot why I was doing what I was doing. And they had this great big song. I love it. And the chorus is what? From now on, we're going to do things differently. And Jesus says, you know what, woman? Yes, you were caught in the very act of adultery. You were caught in the very act of an executable sin. But from now on, you can be completely different. From now on, you can go and sin no more. From now on, your life doesn't have to be defined by your sin. I think I wrote that up there. Yeah. There is more to life than your sin. We need to understand that. Jesus came that we may have life and have it abundantly. And Jesus comes to this woman and he offers her grace and he offers her hope. And he says, from now on, it doesn't have to be the way it was. Dignity, compassion, honesty, grace, hope, all of this given to this woman. A new beginning. Anybody wondering about the man yet? I started off talking about the guy who got away with it, right? You know, every time I've taught this passage in class, every time, without exception, okay, there's one question that's always asked. Where's the man? The law says the man is guilty and needs to be executed, as well as the woman. The emphasis on the law is actually on the execution of the man, not the woman. Because in that culture, it was a man who was taking the possession of another man by sleeping with his wife. Where's the man? The law demands he be there. The law demands there be witnesses to his guilt. If she's guilty, he's guilty. Where's the man? I wish I knew. Did he escape? Did he run away? Did they let him go? Was he a friend of the scribes and Pharisees who busted in and witnessed it? Was he all a part of some elaborate scheme to concoct this thing to trap Jesus? Honestly, we don't know. Was he one of the ones in the crowd, in the temple, when all this was going on? I don't know. But I can tell you this. Of all the characters in this story, the man who got away with it is the one to be pitied the most. The most. The woman, as bad as it started for her, walked out of that temple that day being blessed with dignity, compassion, honesty, grace, and hope given to her by the Creator of the world. That woman left having had a conversation with the Alpha and the Omega, the Holy One of Israel, God in the flesh. She was given a new lease on life, offered hope to sin no more. He will spend the rest of his days, if he truly was in the act, looking over his shoulder in guilt, living a life of shame. not able to look at people in the eye or in the face because of what they knew he had done. You see, the worst thing that may have ever happened to that man is that he got away with it. Because sometimes we never come face to face with our sin when we get away with it. Until we come face to face with our sin, repentance can't take place. And if repentance can't take place, then a relationship with Jesus Christ cannot take place. You see, the best thing that ever happened to that woman who was caught in adultery is that she was caught in adultery. Because God, through some conniving Pharisees, introduced her to the very living water Jack talked about and the bread of life that we talked about this morning. Man, can our God work or what? Today, you may think you're getting away with it. You may think nobody knows. You may think there's sin in your life that can't be forgiven. First of all, let me just say, somebody knows. Jesus knows. God knows. And the second thing, there's not a sin you can commit that God can't forgive and won't forgive. And the best thing that needs to happen to you is maybe you need to get caught. Or maybe you just need to see yourself for who you are. Because until you see your sin for how it really is, you will never appreciate the greatness of the gospel of what Jesus did for you. Today, maybe you need to repent of sin and come face to face with the one who will give you dignity, compassion, honesty, grace, and hope. Jesus still offers that to sinners today, in addition to a life of blessing. Maybe you would like our shepherds to pray for that today. They would love to do that. We would love to do that. And also understand this. We would love to wrap our arms around you and pray with you, not as superior, but as fellow sinners who also have received dignity, compassion, honesty, grace, and hope from God. Maybe you're ready to put him on in baptism this morning. Commit a life to following him, whatever you need, though. Don't walk out of here as you walked in. If you need to respond, let us know as we stand and as we sing.